Tyler Brooks tossed a crumpled dollar bill onto the diner floor and smiled into his phone camera. Crawl for it, old man. Show everybody how a war hero really lives. Michael Carter's hand trembled over the coins he'd been counting. 68 years old, a soldier, once now just a man begging for soup money, while a teenager filmed his humiliation for the world to laugh at. Behind Tyler, unnoticed, a massive gray-bearded man in a Hells Angels vest set down his coffee cup. Slowly, deliberately, like a storm deciding where to land. Hey everyone, before we dive into this story, if you believe respect should never be optional, hit that subscribe button and stay with me until the very end and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from tonight. I love seeing how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The fluorescent lights of Rosie's Diner buzzed overhead, casting a pale, indifferent glow over linoleum floors that had seen 40 years of spilled coffee and small-town gossip. Outside, the autumn wind cut through the parking lot of this forgotten stretch of Arizona highway, rattling the diner's glass door every time someone walked in. It was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody, except for the two strangers who would change everything before the night was through. Michael Carter had been sitting in the corner booth for almost an hour, nursing a glass of water the waitress had given him without asking for payment. His jacket, military green, once had faded into something closer to ash gray, the fabric worn thin at the elbows. His hands calloused, scarred, marked by decades of labor, and something deeper, something that lived underneath the skin, counted out coins on the table. Quarters, dimes, a single crumpled $5 bill he'd been saving for 3 days. He needed $6.20 for the soup and bread special. He had $4.85. You doing okay over there, hun? The waitress, a woman in her 60s named Donna with silver hair, pulled into a tight bun, paused by his table for the third time that evening. I'm fine, ma'am, Michael said, his voice low and steady, carrying the particular calm of a man who had learned long ago not to ask for things he couldn't pay for. Just figuring some things out. Donna's eyes lingered on him a moment longer than necessary. There was something about the way he sat, spine straight, shoulders square, even with the world clearly having beaten him down, that made her want to ask more questions. But the bell above the door jingled, and 3 teenagers spilled into the diner loud and laughing, dragging the cold air in with them. Tyler Brooks led the pack, blonde hair gelled into careless perfection, a Letterman jacket that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and a phone already raised in his hand, recording everything, narrating his own life as if the world existed specifically to witness it. Yeah, this place is actually disgusting, Tyler said into his phone, panning the camera across the diner's worn booths. Like my grandma's nursing home has better vibes than this. His friends, a stocky kid named Brandon and a nervous, smaller boy named Casey, who seemed to exist mostly to laugh at whatever Tyler said, slid into a booth near the window. Dude, just order something, Brandon said. I'm starving. In a minute, Tyler said. His eyes had already found their next subject, Michael Carter counting his coins in the corner. Tyler's smile shifted. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't even cruelty yet, not fully. It was the particular hungry look of a boy who had spent his entire life being told that everyone existed for his entertainment and who had just spotted his next piece of content. Bro, look at this guy, Tyler whispered to his friends, angling his phone. I think he's like actually homeless, in here, at a restaurant. That's wild, Casey snickered. Tyler, don't what I'm not doing anything. Tyler stood, phone still recording, and began walking toward Michael's booth with the loose, confident swagger of a kid who had never once in his life faced a consequence that mattered. At the counter, nursing a black coffee that had long since gone cold, sat a man who took up considerably more space than his stool seemed designed for. Jack Sullivan, known to the men who rode beside him as Iron Wolf, was 56 years old, built like a retired heavyweight who had simply decided to stop competing rather than stop training. His beard, more salt than pepper now, was trimmed close and neat, his arms bare beneath his leather vest despite the cold outside, were a roadmap of ink, eagle skulls, dates that meant something only to him, and beneath it all, faded with age, a set of dog tags tattooed just above his wrist. The patch on his vest read Hells Angels in red letters stitched against white, the kind of patch that made most people in any diner across America instinctively look away and mind their own business. Jack had clocked Tyler's group the moment they walked in. Old habit. You didn't survive 2 decades on the road in bar and clubhouses in places far rougher than this diner, without developing an instinct for trouble before it announced itself. But it wasn't Tyler that had caught Jack's real attention. It was the old man in the corner booth. Jack had noticed him almost immediately, the posture first. Most homeless men Jack had encountered over the years, and he'd encountered plenty, carried themselves folded inward shoulders, curved like they were trying to take up less space in a world that had already told them they didn't deserve any. This man sat differently, spine straight, chin level, even counting nickels like his life depended on it, which Jack suspected. It did. There was something disciplined in the way he held himself. And then Jack saw the jacket. Beneath the frayed collar, barely visible, was the edge of a patch. Faded almost to nothing, but Jack recognized the shape immediately. A unit insignia, Army, and just below it, stitched in a place most people would never think to look, a row of ribbon bars, sun-bleached, thread-worn, but unmistakably real. Combat ribbons. Jack's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He'd seen that posture before. He'd seen those ribbons before on men he'd served beside men who'd come home from places that didn't let go of them easily. He recognized something else too, the slight, almost invisible favor the old man gave his left leg whenever he shifted his weight. An old injury, a serious one. This wasn't just some unlucky drifter who'd fallen on hard times. This was a soldier the world had forgotten. Jack's eyes moved from the old man to Tyler, now standing directly over the corner booth, phone-raised grin spreading across his face like oil across water. "Hey, old-timer," Tyler said, voice pitched loud enough for the whole diner to hear, performing for an audience that existed only on his phone screen. "What's the deal, man? You just gonna sit here all night counting your pennies?" Michael didn't look up immediately. He'd learned over 3 years on the streets that looking up too quickly only invited more attention. "Just having a drink of water, son. Don't mean any trouble." "Oh, I'm not trouble," Tyler said, laughing, glancing back at his friends to make sure they were watching. "I'm just curious. Like, do you guys smell different on purpose? Is that like a survival thing? Keeps the bears away." Brandon laughed loudly. Casey's laugh was thinner, more uncertain, his eyes darting toward the rest of the diner, where conversations had gone suspiciously quiet. Donna behind the counter set down the coffee pot she'd been holding. "Young man, that's enough." "I'm just talking to him," Tyler said, all wide-eyed innocence, the practiced expression of a kid who'd learned that adults rarely push back hard when you smiled while being cruel. "We're having a conversation." "Right, man?" Michael said nothing. His hand, still resting on the small pile of coins, had gone very still. Jack felt something cold settle behind his ribs. He'd felt this exact sensation before in bars and parking lots, in places far darker than this diner, the specific rising pressure of watching someone decide to hurt another person simply because they believed they could get away with it. He didn't move yet. Not yet. He wanted to see how far this would go. He wanted to give the boy every chance to stop himself. He didn't. "You know what?" Tyler said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a single wrinkled dollar bill. "Let's make this interesting." He held the bill up to his phone camera, narrating. "Okay, chat. We got an experiment here. Watch this." He dropped the dollar. It fluttered down, landing on the floor beside Michael's worn boots. "There you go," Tyler said. "Free money. All you got to do is get it." Michael's eyes finally lifted, meeting Tyler's gaze directly. There was no anger in them, not yet. Just a deep, exhausted weariness, the look of a man who had survived things this boy could never imagine, and had nothing left to prove to anyone, least of all, a child playing dress-up with cruelty. "I don't need your dollar," Michael said quietly. "Sure you do," Tyler said, his voice hardening just slightly, the smile staying fixed even as something colder crept into his eyes. "You need it bad. I watched you counting nickels like your life depended on it. So go on, pick it up." Casey shifted uncomfortably. "Tyler, come on, man, let's just order." "Shut up, Casey, this is good content." Tyler kept his eyes locked on Michael. "Pick it up." The diner had gone completely silent now. Every fork had stopped moving. Every conversation had died. A young mother in a nearby booth pulled her son closer, covering his eyes, as if she could shield him from the cruelty unfolding just a few feet away. And still nobody moved to stop it. That was the part that would stay with Jack longest in the weeks that followed. Not Tyler's cruelty. He'd seen cruelty before, ugly and casual, the kind that didn't even recognize itself in the mirror. What stayed with him was the silence. A diner full of grown adults watching a homeless veteran being humiliated by a child and not one of them willing to risk their own comfort to stop it. Michael's hand moved toward the floor. His leg, the damaged one, the one Jack had already noticed, buckled slightly as he began to lower himself, a wince of pain crossing his face that he tried and failed to hide. "There you go," Tyler said, delighted, zooming his phone in closer. "Crawl for it, old man. Show everybody how a war hero really lives." The words hit the diner like a physical blow. Donna gasped audibly behind the counter. The young mother's grip on her son tightened. Even Brandon's laughter faltered, his grin slipping into something uncertain. Michael froze halfway, bent toward the floor, his hand inches from the crumpled dollar bill. Something flickered across his face, not anger, not yet, but a deep, bottomless shame, the particular humiliation of a man who had once worn a uniform with pride, being reduced to a punchline for a child's social media followers. And that was the exact moment Jack Sullivan stood up. He didn't slam his coffee cup down. He didn't shout. He simply rose from his stool with the unhurried, deliberate calm of a man who had made peace long ago with violence and had also made peace with the fact that violence was rarely the answer that mattered most. The sound of his boots on the linoleum was the only sound in the diner. Tyler, fully absorbed in his phone and his own performance in the dopamine hit of imagined viral fame, never heard him coming. Jack closed the distance in 4 long strides. He reached Michael's booth just as the old veteran's fingers brushed the edge of the dollar bill, and Jack's hand, enormous, weathered, marked with the same kind of ink that told his own silent war stories, closed gently over Michael's shoulder. Not to pull him up roughly, not to make a scene, just to stop him, to tell him without a single word yet spoken that he didn't have to do this. "Brother," Jack said quietly, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floor itself, "don't ever kneel for disrespect." Tyler's laughter died in his throat. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the way a man turns when he already suspects somewhere in his gut that turning around is the worst possible decision he could make. Tyler lowered his phone and looked over his shoulder, and found himself staring directly into the chest of a man built like a brick wall wrapped in leather marked by ink and time, and something far more dangerous than mere size. Tyler's eyes traveled upward, past the broad shoulders, past the thick neck, past the gray beard trimmed neat but unmistakably fierce, up to a pair of eyes that held no rage, no fury, nothing that Tyler could have anticipated or prepared for. Just calm, absolute immovable calm, and stitched across the chest of that leather vest, impossible to miss, now that he was finally looking the patch that made grown men in 3 states cross the street rather than make eye contact. Hell's Angels. Tyler's phone, still recording, slipped slightly in his suddenly sweaty grip. "Oh," Tyler said, his voice cracking, all the swagger draining out of it in an instant. "Oh, I wasn't." "You weren't what?" Jack asked, his tone never rising, never sharpening, which somehow made it infinitely more terrifying than if he'd screamed. "Filming an old man for laughs, telling a combat veteran to crawl on the floor like a tomato." The word combat veteran rippled through the diner like an electric current. Donna's hand flew to her mouth. Casey took an instinctive step backward, nearly tripping over a chair. Brandon, for the first time all evening, looked genuinely afraid. "How do you?" Tyler started, then stopped. His mind clearly racing, trying to reconstruct his footing, trying to find some version of this moment where he still held the power. "I notice things," Jack said simply. "It's a habit you pick up after enough years." His eyes moved briefly, gently to Michael, still frozen, half bent toward the floor, his face a mixture of shock and something that might have been the very first flicker of hope he'd felt in a long time. "Easy, brother," Jack murmured to him, his voice shifting into something almost tender. "You don't owe this boy anything. Stand up. Slow. I got you." Michael straightened, wincing again, as his weight shifted off his bad leg, but his eyes never left Jack's face. There was a question in them, disbelief, mostly the particular disbelief of a man who had been invisible to the world for so long that being seen, truly seen, felt almost physically disorienting. "Why are you?" Michael started, his voice rough, uncertain. "Because somebody should have stood up an hour ago," Jack said, loud enough now that the entire diner could hear him clearly. "And because I know exactly what that patch on your jacket means, even if this kid doesn't." He turned back to Tyler, and for the first time something harder entered his voice. Not anger exactly, but the unmistakable weight of judgment. "You want to film something for your little videos, kid, film this part. Film yourself picking that dollar back up off the floor. Tyler blinked. What? You heard me? Jack's voice dropped lower, somehow more dangerous for its quietness. You threw it. You pick it up. I'm not. Tyler glanced around the diner, searching for an ally, anyone, and found nothing but a room full of faces that had gone from frightened silence to something colder, something closer to contempt. This is stupid. I'm not picking up a dollar. You will, Jack said. Or we're going to have a much longer conversation about what kind of man hides behind a phone screen to torment somebody who's already lost everything. Brandon tugged at Tyler's sleeve. Bro, just do it. Just pick it up. Shut up, Brandon. No, seriously, dude, just... Brandon's voice had risen into something close to panic. That's a Hell's Angel. Do you understand what that means? My uncle told me stories about... I don't care what your uncle... Pick up the dollar, son. Jack's voice cut through the bickering like a blade, and the diner went silent again, every eye fixed on the standoff between the towering biker and the suddenly very small-looking teenager. For a long moment, nobody moved. Tyler's jaw worked silently, pride and fear warring visibly across his face. His friends had both backed away, now putting distance between themselves and whatever was about to happen, leaving Tyler alone in the space he'd created for himself. And then slowly, his shoulders sagging, Tyler crouched down and picked the dollar bill up off the floor. It was a small gesture, insignificant in the grand scheme of the evening's events, but the diner seemed to exhale collectively at the sight of it, as if some essential balance had been restored, even if only partially, even if only for a moment. Now, Jack said, his voice softening just slightly, though the weight behind it remained, you're going to give that dollar to him, and you're going to tell him you're sorry, and you're going to mean it. Tyler's hand trembled slightly as he held the bill out toward Michael. I'm sorry, Bo, he muttered, his eyes fixed on the floor, unable to meet Michael's gaze. Michael looked at the dollar for a long moment. Then slowly he reached out and took it, not because he needed it, not really, not in this moment, but because refusing it would have denied Tyler the only meaningful thing he could offer, an acknowledgement of what he'd done. Apology accepted, Michael said quietly. But you should know something, son. I didn't serve overseas so kids like you could humiliate folks for entertainment. I served so you'd have the freedom to be better than this. Don't waste it. The words landed with a weight that seemed to physically press down on Tyler's shoulders. His phone, still recording, somehow captured the moment his face crumpled. Not into tears exactly, but into something close to genuine shame, the first authentic emotion he'd shown all evening. And then from a booth near the back of the diner, a voice spoke up. Wait! An elderly woman rose unsteadily from her seat, her hand gripping her cane, her eyes fixed on Michael with an expression of dawning, almost disbelieving recognition. I know that face, oh my lord, I know that face. The diner turned its collective attention toward her. Ma'am, Michael asked, confusion crossing his features. 8 years ago, the woman said, her voice trembling now. On Highway 60, there was an accident, a truck rollover. My husband was trapped inside and the gas tank was leaking, and everybody just stood there too afraid to get close. But a man, a soldier, somebody said, home on leave, he pulled my husband out, carried him 50 yards before the truck went up in flames. Her eyes filled with tears. That was you. I'd recognize that face anywhere. That was you. A heavy silence fell over the diner, but this one felt different from the silence that had come before. This silence held its breath waiting. Michael's expression had gone pale, his hands trembling slightly. I don't recall the details exactly, ma'am. That was a long time ago, and I wasn't... Don't you dare be modest, the woman said, her voice breaking. My husband lived 8 more years because of you. He got to see our granddaughter born because of you. And here you are in this diner being treated like garbage by some spoiled child who has no idea what real sacrifice looks like. The diner had gone completely, utterly silent. And in that silence, every single person present finally understood that the man they'd watched being humiliated only minutes earlier was not just some forgotten drifter, some statistic, some inconvenient presence to be tolerated or mocked. He was someone's hero, and nobody, not one single person in that diner had recognized it until it was almost too late. Jack's hand remained steady on Michael's shoulder throughout the revelation, a quiet, grounding presence as the old veteran absorbed the unexpected weight of being seen, truly seen, for the first time and longer than he could remember. Brother, Jack said quietly, just loud enough for Michael to hear. Looks like this town's got a longer memory than you gave it credit for. Michael's eyes glistened, though he fought visibly against the emotion threatening to surface. I just did what anybody would have done. No, Jack said firmly. You did what almost nobody would have done. There's a difference, and don't you ever forget it. Tyler stood frozen near the booth, his phone now lowered completely, the live stream apparently forgotten his earlier swagger, replaced by something that looked uncomfortably close to genuine horror at what he'd nearly done, at who he'd nearly destroyed for the sake of a few minutes of online attention. I didn't know, Tyler said weakly to no one in particular. I didn't know he was... That's exactly the problem, son, Jack said, turning to face him fully now. You didn't know and you didn't bother to find out. You looked at a man who's given everything and all you saw was an easy target. That's not just cruelty, that's blindness. And it's going to keep hurting people until you learn to actually see them. Tyler had no response to that. For perhaps the first time in his entire privileged, consequence-free life, he had absolutely nothing to say. Donna, finally breaking from her stunned silence behind the counter, moved quickly toward Michael's booth, untying her apron as she walked. Mr. Carter, that's your name. Isn't it, Carter? You sit right back down, sir. Whatever you want tonight, it's on the house. Soup, sandwich, pie, whatever you'd like. Ma'am, I couldn't possibly. You absolutely could, and you absolutely will, Donna said firmly in a tone that suggested decades of experience telling stubborn customers exactly how things were going to be. I should have stepped in the moment that boy opened his mouth. The least I can do now is make sure you eat a proper meal. Michael looked between Donna's insistent expression and Jack's steady approving presence beside him, and something in his weathered face finally softened. Not quite a smile, not yet, but something close to it. The first genuine warmth he'd allowed himself to feel in longer than he could remember. Thank you, he said quietly. Both of you. Jack squeezed his shoulder once more before releasing it. Don't thank me yet, brother. We're not done talking tonight. Michael glanced up at him, confusion flickering across his features. What do you mean? But Jack didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned back toward Tyler, who still stood frozen near the booth, seemingly unsure whether he was allowed to leave, whether the confrontation had truly ended, or whether something worse still waited. You, Jack said, and your friends, sit down. All three of you. Tyler hesitated. Sir, I really think we should just sit down. There was something in Jack's voice this time, not louder, not angrier, but final in a way that left absolutely no room for argument. Tyler's legs seemed to move of their own accord, sliding him into the nearest booth, Brandon and Casey following with visible reluctance, none of them quite making eye contact with anyone in the room. The diner, which had been holding its breath for what felt like an eternity, seemed to lean in collectively, sensing that whatever was about to happen next would matter far more than the humiliation that had already unfolded. Jack pulled a chair from a nearby table and positioned it at the end of Tyler's booth, sitting down with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who had absolutely nowhere else he needed to be. You want to know something about real strength, kid? Jack asked, his voice quieter now, almost contemplative. Real strength doesn't need an audience. Real strength doesn't need a camera. The men I served with, the men I still ride with, most of them never tell anybody what they did, what they sacrificed, what they're still carrying around in their heads at 3 a.m. when the rest of the world is asleep. Tyler said nothing, his eyes fixed somewhere on the table between them. You think filming an old man's humiliation makes you somebody, Jack continued. Makes you matter, gets you noticed. He shook his head slowly, but all it really shows is that you've got nothing real to offer the world. No substance, no character, just an audience you're terrified of losing. The words seemed to land with physical weight, and Tyler's shoulders curled inward, the posture of a boy finally confronting something he'd spent his entire life avoiding. I rode with men who came home from places you've never heard of, Jack went on, carrying wounds you can't see in any photograph. Men who lost brothers, lost pieces of themselves, lost the ability to sleep through a full night without waking up in a cold sweat. And most of them you'd never know it to look at them because they don't perform their pain for an audience. They just carry it, quietly, every single day. He glanced toward Michael, who had settled back into his booth, Donna already setting a steaming bowl of soup in front of him. That man, Jack said, carries more weight in his bad leg than you'll ever understand. And you made him crawl for $1 so you could get views. He let the silence stretch heavy and accusatory before adding, "How does that feel now that you know who he is?" Tyler's voice, when it finally came, was barely above a whisper. "It feels terrible." "Good," Jack said simply. "It should." From across the diner, Brandon spoke up tentatively. "Sir, I mean, mister, we didn't know. I swear none of us knew he was a veteran. We just thought, you just thought he was homeless, and that made it okay to humiliate him." Jack finished, his eyes moving to Brandon now. "That's the part that should bother you more than the veteran thing's son. It shouldn't have mattered whether he served or not. A man down on his luck deserves basic dignity regardless of his history. The fact that you only feel bad now that you know his story, that tells you something about where your moral compass actually points." The diner had fallen into a different kind of silence now. Not the frozen, horrified stillness of earlier, but something more reflective, more uncomfortable in a quieter way, as patrons throughout the restaurant seemed to be turning Jack's words over in their own minds, applying them to choices they themselves had made or failed to make over the years. Near the counter, a retired police officer named Frank Williams, who had been quietly observing the entire scene unfold while nursing his coffee, finally spoke up. "I know that name," Frank said, his voice carrying easily across the now quiet diner. "Carter, Michael Carter." He turned toward Michael's booth, studying the older man's face with growing certainty. "You used to volunteer down at the VFW outreach program, didn't you? Well before things got hard for you. Used to help organize the winter coat drives for other veterans." Michael looked up from his soup, surprise evident in his weathered features. "That was a long time ago." 3 years, maybe 4, Frank said, nodding slowly. "I remember because you helped my partner's brother get connected with disability benefits he didn't even know he qualified for. Saved that family a world of hardship." Frank shook his head, something like guilt crossing his face. "I had no idea things had gotten this bad for you. I'm sorry, Michael. I should have checked in, should have asked around when you stopped showing up." Michael's jaw tightened, his eyes glistening again with emotion he was clearly fighting to contain. Things happen fast when they happen. One missed disability payment, one medical bill you can't cover, and suddenly you're 3 months behind on rent, and nobody wants to rent to a man with my kind of record, even though my only record is 22 years of honorable service. The diner absorbed this information in heavy silence, the full weight of how quickly an honored life could collapse into invisibility settling over the room. Jack listened to all of it with quiet attention, something hardening in his expression. Not anger exactly, but a deep, resolute determination that hadn't been there moments before. "How long you been on the streets, Michael?" Jack asked. "Going on 3 years now," Michael admitted quietly. "Started after my second surgery. The leg," he added, gesturing vaguely toward his damaged limb. "IED, outside Kandahar, took most of the muscle. They patched me up best they could, but the VA wait list, the paperwork, the appeals process, it ate up every bit of savings I had left, and then some. Lost my apartment, lost touch with my daughter eventually. Hard to maintain relationships when you're sleeping in your truck, and then, after the truck got repossessed, wherever you can find shelter from the weather." "You have a daughter?" Jack asked. Something flickered across Michael's face, pain, regret, longing all tangled together. "Sarah. She's 31 now, lives up in Flagstaff, far as I know. We haven't spoken in over 2 years. I didn't want her seeing me like this. Didn't want to be a burden on her life when she's got her own family to worry about." Jack absorbed this information silently, his jaw working as he processed it. "Pride's a heavy thing to carry alone, brother." "It's the only thing I had left to carry," Michael said simply. "Wasn't about to lose that too." The diner had grown so quiet that the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter seemed almost deafening. Tyler, still seated in his booth, had gone completely still, his earlier bravado utterly extinguished, replaced by something that looked uncomfortably like genuine reckoning. "Mr. Carter," Tyler said suddenly, his voice cracking slightly. I know I already said it, but I'm really sorry. I had no idea. I wasn't thinking about you as a person at all. I was just thinking about—" He stopped, seeming to catch himself before finishing the thought, but everyone in the diner understood exactly what he'd been about to say. Views, followers, attention. "I know," Michael said, not unkindly. "That's usually how it goes, son. People stop seeing each other as people the second a phone camera comes out. Everybody becomes a character in somebody else's story instead of the main character in their own." The wisdom in the statements seemed to land heavily on everyone listening, Tyler included, who lowered his eyes back to the table, clearly turning the words over in his mind. Jack, watching the exchange, felt something shift inside his chest. Not quite resolution, not yet, but the early stirring of an idea, a plan forming in the space where his anger had been only minutes before. He'd seen plenty of homeless veterans over his years on the road. Too many. Men who'd given everything overseas only to come home and discover that the country they'd sacrificed for had no real plan for what came next. No safety net sturdy enough to catch them when the bureaucracy failed, when the benefits got tangled in red tape, when the wounds visible and invisible both proved too heavy to carry alone. He'd watched good men disappear into the cracks before, had attended too many funerals for brothers who'd survived combat zones only to be defeated by isolation and forgotten promises back home. He wasn't about to let that happen to Michael Carter. Not tonight, not while there was still something he could do about it. "Michael," Jack said, his voice carrying a new weight of purpose, "finish your soup. We're going to talk about something important, you and me, once you're done eating." Michael looked up, curiosity and wariness mixing in his expression. "What kind of something?" "The kind of something that doesn't get decided on an empty stomach." Jack said, a faint smile finally cracking through his weathered features. "Eat first. Talk later." As Michael returned his attention to his soup color, slowly returning to his pale cheeks with each spoonful, Donna approached Jack's chair, refilling his coffee cup without being asked. "That was a good thing you did tonight," she said, quietly glancing toward Tyler's booth, where the teenager remained sunk in uncomfortable silence. "Lord knows somebody needed to." "Wasn't planning on it," Jack admitted, "but some things you can't just sit and watch happen, not when you've got the ability to stop it." "Well, this town's going to remember it," Donna said. "Word travels fast around here, especially about something like this." Jack's expression remained thoughtful, distant, his mind clearly already moving toward whatever came next. "Word traveling isn't really the point, ma'am. The point is making sure a good man doesn't get forgotten all over again the second this diner empties out tonight." Across the room, Tyler's phone buzzed in his pocket, a notification probably from whatever platform he'd been streaming, to probably alerting him to comments, to views, to the digital audience that had likely already begun reacting to whatever footage he'd captured before everything changed. He didn't check it. For the first time in longer than he could remember, the phone in his pocket felt less like a source of validation and more like evidence of something he was deeply ashamed of. "Mister," Tyler said, suddenly looking up at Jack with an expression that mixed fear and something that might have been the beginning of genuine respect. "What happens now? Are you going to, is this going to be a bigger problem for me?" Jack studied him for a long moment before answering. "That depends entirely on you, son. What happens after tonight, whether you let this moment actually change something in you, or whether you go home and convince yourself it was no big deal, that's entirely up to you. I'm not interested in destroying your life over one terrible decision. I'm interested in whether you're capable of becoming someone better than the person you were an hour ago." Tyler swallowed hard. "I don't know how to do that." "Nobody does at first," Jack said. "But it starts with seeing people, really seeing them, not as content, not as entertainment, as human beings carrying their own battles you know nothing about." He glanced toward Michael, still eating quietly, Donna hovering nearby with the protective attentiveness of someone who had appointed herself the old veteran's guardian for the remainder of the evening. That man right there has survived things you can't imagine. And he still hasn't given up, and not on this country, not on the values he served for, not even on people like you who clearly haven't earned that kind of grace yet. The diner remained quiet around them patrons throughout the restaurant, listening intently, several of them exchanging glances that suggested private resolutions, forming promises to themselves about paying closer attention, about intervening sooner, about refusing to let silence become complicity the next time they witnessed someone being humiliated. Michael finished his soup, setting the spoon down with the careful precision of a man unaccustomed to receiving kindness without expecting some hidden cost attached. He looked up at Jack, gratitude and curiosity mixing in his weathered features. "All right," he said, "I'm done eating. What's this important conversation you wanted to have?" Jack leaned forward slightly, his expression turning serious, purposeful. "Michael, how would you feel about steady work? Something that uses your discipline, your organizational skills, the kind of precision 22 years in the military beats into a man." Michael blinked clearly, caught off guard by the sudden shift. What kind of work are we talking about? I run logistics and inventory for a motorcycle workshop a few miles from here, Jack said. Used to handle it myself, but between club business and the shop itself, I'm stretched too thin to do either job properly. I need somebody reliable, somebody who shows up, does the work right, and doesn't need constant supervision to get it done. Michael's expression shifted through several emotions in quick succession: surprise, suspicion, hope, and finally a wary kind of disbelief. You're offering me a job. Just like that, you don't even know me. I know enough, Jack said simply. I know you served 22 years. I know you've got the discipline to count change down to the penny, rather than spend what little you had on something foolish. I know you carried a man 50 yards from a burning truck without thinking twice about your own safety. That tells me everything I need to know about your character, Michael. The rest, the skills, the specifics, that's just details we can work out. Michael stared at him for a long moment, something cracking visible behind his eyes. 3 years of accumulated rejection of doors closed in his face, of being told he wasn't qualified, wasn't trustworthy, wasn't worth the risk. All of it colliding suddenly with an offer that seemed to come from nowhere, freely given, asking nothing in return except honest work. Why would you do this for me? Michael asked, his voice rough with barely contained emotion. You don't owe me anything. Brother, Jack said it quietly, every single one of us owes something to the men and women who served. Whether we ever paid that debt or not, the obligation exists regardless. Tonight, I've got the chance to pay a small piece of mine. I'm not about to walk out of this diner and let that chance disappear. Michael's hands resting on the table had begun to tremble slightly, not from weakness, but from the overwhelming weight of unexpected hope, the particular vertigo of having a door open after years of nothing but closed ones. I haven't worked steady in 3 years, Michael admitted. I don't know if I still remember how to function in that kind of structure anymore. You'll remember, Jack said with absolute confidence. Discipline like yours doesn't disappear. It just gets buried under enough hardship that you forget it's still there. We'll dig it back out together. Across the diner, Tyler watched the exchange unfold with an expression that had shifted somewhere in the last few minutes from shame into something that looked almost like wonder. Witnessing, perhaps for the first time in his sheltered life, what genuine, unselfish kindness actually looked like in practice rather than in theory. Mr. Tyler said quietly, addressing Jack again. Can I ask you something? Jack glanced at him. Go ahead. Why didn't you just hit me? Tyler asked. Back when I was being cruel to him. Most people, if they had your size, your reputation, they would have just hit me, scared me straight or whatever. Why didn't you? Jack considered the question seriously before answering. Because hitting you would have made me exactly what you accused this whole community of being earlier tonight without realizing it. Somebody who solves problems with force instead of understanding. Violence might have scared you for a night, but it wouldn't have taught you anything real. What you needed wasn't a beating son. What you needed was to actually see the person you were hurting, to understand the weight of what you were doing. A bruise heals in a week, real understanding that's supposed to last a lifetime. The diner had fallen into a contemplative silence, the kind that follows genuine wisdom, rather than mere confrontation. Patrons throughout the restaurant, absorbing Jack's words with expressions ranging from quiet respect to outright admiration. Michael, watching Jack with new eyes, felt something shift inside his own chest. The first genuine stirring of hope he'd allowed himself to feel in longer than he could accurately remember. 3 years of invisibility, of rejection, of slowly losing faith, not just in other people, but in himself, in his own worth, in whether the sacrifices he'd made overseas had meant anything at all, in a country that seemed increasingly content to forget men like him existed. And then in the space of a single evening, in a roadside diner, he'd wandered into, simply hoping for a bowl of soup, everything had changed. He didn't yet know how completely. He didn't yet know that the job offer sitting on the table in front of him would become the foundation for rebuilding not just his finances, but his entire sense of self-worth. He didn't yet know that the workshop Jack mentioned would become a place where his particular skills, discipline, precision, the ability to organize chaos into order, would be not just utilized, but genuinely valued. He didn't yet know that Tyler's transformation, beginning in this very diner, would eventually lead the boy back into his life in ways neither of them could currently imagine. He only knew in this single suspended moment that for the first time in 3 long years, somebody had looked at him and seen not a burden, not a problem to be managed, not an inconvenient reminder of society's failures, but a man still capable of contributing, still possessing value, still worthy of basic human dignity and respect. All right, Michael said, finally extending his hand across the table toward Jack, his voice steadier now than it had been all evening. I'll take that job, and I'll do right by it. You have my word. Jack gripped his hand firmly, the handshake of two men who understood on some fundamental level the particular language of service and sacrifice that bound them together. Despite their different branches, different decades, different battles fought. Welcome aboard, brother, Jack said. We start tomorrow morning. Around them, the diner seemed to exhale collectively, the tension that had gripped the room for the better part of an hour, finally beginning to dissolve into something warmer, something closer to hope. But as Donna began clearing plates and the evening's other patrons slowly returned to their interrupted conversations, nobody in that diner yet understood that this single evening, this collision of cruelty and kindness, of humiliation and redemption, was only the very beginning of a story that would unfold over months to come, testing every person involved in ways none of them could currently anticipate. Tyler's transformation had barely begun. Michael's path back toward dignity had only just started. And Jack Sullivan, the man who had set all of it in motion with nothing more than a steady hand and a few quiet words, had no idea yet just how deeply this particular night would alter the course of his own life as well. Outside the diner, the autumn wind continued to howl across the empty Arizona highway, carrying with it the particular chill of a season changing, of old patterns dying, of new beginnings waiting patiently to take root. Inside, four very different people, a forgotten veteran, a privileged teenager, a hardened biker, and an entire community of witnesses, had just experienced something that would alter the trajectory of their lives in ways far more profound than any of them could yet comprehend. The story, in truth, was only just beginning. Donna had barely cleared the soup bowl when Frank Williams's phone buzzed against the counter loud enough that half the diner glanced over. He read the screen and his face changed. "Michael," Frank said slowly, "you're going to want to see this." Michael frowned. "See what?" Frank turned the phone around. It was a local community page, the kind every small town kept running: lost dogs, yard sales, school board complaints. Someone had already posted. A grainy photo, clearly snapped from a booth across the diner, showed Tyler frozen mid-crouch, reaching for the dollar bill, Jack standing over him like a mountain that had decided to take human shape. The caption read, "Tyler Brooks just got humbled by a Hell's Angel after bullying a homeless vet at Rosie's." Anybody else there? Already 11 comments, already people tagging Tyler's name. Tyler's stomach dropped before he even saw it. Wait, who took that? Who posted that? Nobody answered. Because the truth was, in a town this size, it didn't matter who. It only mattered that it was out now, moving faster than any of them could control. Jack's expression didn't shift, but something behind his eyes sharpened. He'd seen this exact pattern before, not with phones and timelines, but with stories that traveled town to town on word of mouth, growing teeth with every retelling. The mechanism had changed. The danger hadn't. "Doesn't matter who posted it," Jack said evenly. "What matters is what happens next." "What happens next is everybody at school's gonna see this," Tyler said, panic creeping into his voice for the first time all night. Not fear of Jack anymore, but fear of something far more familiar to a boy like him. Judgment. Public judgment, the kind he usually handed out, now pointed back at him. "Good," Michael said quietly. Tyler's head snapped toward him. "Good. You think it's good that I'm about to get destroyed online?" "I think," Michael said, his voice steady, carrying the calm of a man who had survived far worse consequences than a bad comment section, "that maybe you should feel exactly what it's like to have strangers decide who you are based on 30 seconds of your worst moment, since that's precisely what you tried to do to me." The words landed hard. Tyler opened his mouth and closed it again because there was nothing he could say that wouldn't sound exactly as hollow as it would be. Brandon, still hunched in the booth beside him, finally spoke. "Tyler, man, my mom's gonna see this. Coach is gonna see this. I know Brandon, I'm sitting right here. I'm just saying this isn't gonna blow over." It wouldn't. And somewhere underneath his panic, Tyler understood that. For years, he'd weaponized exactly this kind of exposure against other people. Quiet kids, awkward kids, anyone who couldn't fight back the way he could. He knew precisely how merciless an audience could be. He'd built his entire identity on being the one holding the camera, never the one being filmed. Now the camera had turned, and he had absolutely no idea how to exist on this side of it. Jack watched the realization settle over the boy's face and felt no satisfaction in it. Only confirmation of something he already understood about cruelty, it always eventually finds its way home. Sir, Tyler said, looking up at Jack, voice smaller now. What do I do? That's not a question I can answer for you, Jack said. But I'll tell you what won't work. Hiding, deleting your accounts, waiting for it to die down so you can go right back to who you were. People can smell that kind of fake remorse from a mile away, and frankly, so can I. Then what? Jack glanced toward Michael, who was watching the exchange with quiet, unreadable focus. You start, Jack said, by actually meaning the apology you already gave him. Not performing it for an audience. Meaning it when no camera's running. Tyler swallowed. I do mean it. Then prove it, Michael said simply. Not to me, prove it to yourself. A short, heavy silence settled over the booth, broken only by the soft clatter of Donna refilling coffee cups 2 tables over, pretending not to listen, while clearly listening to every word. Then Tyler's phone buzzed again. And again. And again in rapid succession, the way a phone only does when something has genuinely caught fire online. He turned it face down on the table without looking, as if that alone could slow it. It didn't. Tyler Brooks, Frank read aloud from his own phone, scrolling through the thread, now blowing up with comments. The same kid who posted that video last spring, mocking a special needs student in the cafeteria. Frank's eyebrows lifted. That you? The color drained from Tyler's face. That was different, Tyler said quickly. That was just a joke. People were laughing, Michael finished for him, not unkindly but pointedly. Funny how everybody's laughing, right up until the joke turns out to be a real person with a real life that gets wrecked by it. Jack's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. This was bigger than tonight, he realized. Bigger than one diner, $1 bill, one humiliated veteran. This was a pattern, a kid who'd been doing this for a long time, who'd simply never been caught by someone with the size, the standing, and the stubbornness to actually stop him mid-performance. How many times you done something like this before? Jack asked, his voice quiet but carrying an edge, now that hadn't been there a moment ago. Tyler didn't answer. Tyler, Jack's voice dropped lower. How many? I don't know, Tyler muttered. A few. It's not always this serious. Usually it's just dumb stuff. Pranks people think it's funny. People think it's funny, Jack repeated slowly, because you've spent years teaching this town that cruelty is entertainment. And tonight, for the first time, somebody finally showed you what it feels like to be on the wrong side of that entertainment. He leaned back slightly, studying the boy with an expression that mixed disgust and something almost like pity. That's not a coincidence, kid. That's consequence finally catching up. The bell above the diner door jingled sharply and every head turned. A woman in her 40s stormed in, dressed in workout clothes, hair pulled back tight, phone already in her hand, face flushed with fury. Tyler Brooks, she snapped, marching directly toward the booth. What in God's name did you do? Tyler shrank visibly. Mom. Don't mom me. I got 4 texts in the last 10 minutes asking if my son humiliated a homeless veteran on camera. Her eyes swept the diner landing, first on Michael, then traveling up to Jack's towering frame, and her fury faltered for half a second before reasserting itself. Is this true? Nobody answered immediately. Tyler stared at the table. It's true, Michael said finally, his voice calm, almost gentle, surprising everyone in the booth. Your son made a mistake tonight, a serious one, but he also apologized and he meant it eventually. The woman's eyes narrowed, confusion cutting through her anger. Why are you defending him? I'm not defending what he did, Michael said. I'm telling you what actually happened because you're about to make a decision about how to handle this and you deserve the full truth before you make it. She looked at her son properly, then really looked the way mothers do when the version of their child they have constructed in their heads suddenly collides violently with reality. Tyler, tell me what happened. Now. And for the first time all night, Tyler told the truth without a single attempt to soften it, without shifting blame, without making himself the misunderstood victim of an overreaction. He told her about the dollar bill, about the limp he'd mocked, about the words crawl for it that were already echoing across half the town's phones. His mother's face went through several transformations as he spoke, disbelief, horror, and finally a kind of devastated shame that seemed to age her 10 years in the space of 2 minutes. That's not the boy I raised, she whispered more to herself than anyone else. With respect, ma'am, Jack said quietly, that's exactly the boy you raised. The question now is whether he's willing to become somebody different. She turned to him, eyes glistening anger and grief tangled together. Who are you, Bastemitam? Name's Jack Sullivan. I'm the one who stopped it. She studied him for a long moment, taking in the vest, the patch, the ink covering his forearms, and something in her posture shifted. Not fear exactly, but a recalibration. The dawning understanding that the man in front of her had likely just done what she as a parent had failed to do for years. Thank you, she said, finally, voice cracking, for stopping him, for not letting it go further than it already did. Don't thank me yet, Jack said. Thank me in 6 months if he's actually changed. Words are cheap tonight. What matters is what he does tomorrow and the day after that. She nodded slowly, then turned back to Tyler, her expression hardening into something resolute. You're going to apologize to this man properly, not the diner version, a real one. And then we're going home, and we're going to have a very long conversation about exactly what kind of person you've apparently decided to become. Tyler, visibly smaller now than he'd been all evening, nodded without argument. He turned to Michael, and this time when he spoke, there was no audience watching, no phone recording, nothing to perform for. I really am sorry, he said quietly. Not because I got caught, because I keep thinking about what you said about not knowing how to be better than this. I don't actually know how, but I want to. Michael studied him for a long moment, weighing the words, searching the boy's face for the particular falseness he'd learned to recognize in people over the years. He didn't find it. That's a start, Michael said, a real one this time. As Tyler's mother ushered her son and his 2 friends toward the door, casting one last grateful glance back at Jack, the diner seemed to release a long collective breath, the tension of the evening finally beginning to dissipate. But just as the door swung shut behind them, Donna's voice cut through the relative calm. Michael, she said, staring at her own phone, now her expression caught somewhere between awe and disbelief. You're not going to believe this. Believe what? She turned the screen toward him. The original post had exploded not with outrage now, but with something else entirely. Comments pouring in from people claiming to recognize him, tagging veterans organizations, sharing his name, alongside fragments of stories Michael himself had nearly forgotten he had ever been part of. One comment posted only minutes earlier read, "This is Michael Carter. He helped my dad navigate his VA claim 3 years ago, when nobody else would even return his calls. Where is he now? Does anybody know if he's okay?" Michael stared at the screen, something tightening in his throat. I had no idea anybody remembered that. Looks like a lot of people do, Frank said, scrolling through more responses, his eyebrows climbing higher with each one. Michael, this is starting to move fast, real fast. Jack leaned forward, reading over Frank's shoulder, his expression unreadable. How fast we talking? Couple thousand shares in the last 20 minutes, Frank said. This isn't staying local anymore. A flicker of unease crossed Jack's face, not because the attention was bad exactly, but because he understood something the others perhaps hadn't fully considered yet. Attention, once it caught fire, didn't always burn in directions you could control. It could lift a man up just as easily as it had nearly destroyed him an hour earlier. Michael, Jack said carefully, you doing all right with all this? Michael's hands had gone still on the table, his eyes fixed on the phone screen on strangers' words, describing a version of himself he'd almost forgotten existed, capable, valued, remembered. I don't know, he admitted quietly. 3 years nobody saw me. Now everybody's seeing me at once. It's a lot to take in all in one night. Take your time with it, Jack said. Nobody's rushing you toward anything. But even as he said it, Jack felt the shape of something larger beginning to form around them. A story that had started as a single act of cruelty in a quiet roadside diner now spreading outward, gathering momentum, pulling in people and consequences. None of them had anticipated when the evening began. Donna's phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, then looked up, her expression shifting into something more serious. Michael, she said slowly, there's a message here from somebody named Sarah Carter. She's asking if anyone at this diner knows how to reach you. The bowl of soup Michael had just finished eating suddenly felt very far away. His breath caught somewhere in his chest, his hands trembling against the table's worn surface. Sarah, he repeated barely above a whisper. My daughter. The diner around him seemed to fall away entirely, narrowing down to that single name, that single fragile possibility hanging suspended in the air between past and present, between 3 years of silence, and whatever waited on the other side of this unexpected, impossible moment. Jack's hands settled once more on Michael's shoulder, steady grounding, the same gesture that had stopped him from kneeling for a dollar bill less than an hour earlier, now anchoring him through an entirely different kind of disorientation. "Brother," Jack said quietly, "looks like tonight isn't finished with you yet." Michael's hand shook so badly he couldn't hold the phone steady. Donna had to read the message aloud for him. "It says, 'My name is Sarah Carter. I think my father might be the man in this video. He has a scar above his left eyebrow and walks with a limp from an old injury. If anyone there knows him, please let him know. I've been looking for him. I never stopped looking." The diner had gone quiet again, but this silence carried none of the dread from earlier. This one held its breath for an entirely different reason. "That's her," Michael said, his voice cracking down the middle. "That's Sarah. That's exactly how she writes. Even her texts always sound like that, careful, like she's choosing every word." He pressed a trembling hand against his mouth. "I never stopped looking. She wrote that." "You want to respond?" Donna asked gently, still holding the phone toward him, like it might shatter. "I don't know what to say." Michael's eyes dry through every humiliation of the past hour finally filled. 3 years, Donna. 3 years I told myself she was better off without me showing up broken and broke at her door. I told myself that was protecting her. "Doesn't sound like she felt protected," Frank said quietly. "Sounds like she felt abandoned." And the words landed like a blow, and Michael flinched because he knew somewhere underneath all his careful justifications that Frank was right. Jack leaned forward, his voice steady. "Brother, you don't have to figure out the whole reunion right this second. Just answer her. Tell her you're alive. Tell her you are safe. The rest can come after." Michael nodded, hands still trembling, as Donna typed the message he dictated word by careful word. "I'm here. I'm okay. I'm sorry it took this long. I love you, Sarah." He hit send before he could talk himself out of it. For a long, agonizing minute, nothing happened. The diner waited with him, nobody pretending to do anything else, every eye fixed on the phone in Donna's hand. Then it buzzed. Donna's breath caught. "She's typing." Another 30 seconds passed like an hour. "I'm 3 hours away. I'm getting in my car right now. Please don't disappear again. Please." Michael made a sound that wasn't quite a she and wasn't quite a laugh, something raw and overwhelmed escaping him all at once. "She's coming. She's actually coming." "Tonight?" Jack asked. "She says she's leaving right now." Michael looked up, panic suddenly cutting through the joy. "Jack, I can't. Look at me. Look at what I am right now. I can't let her see me like this, sleeping in a doorway, smelling like—" "You're not sleeping in a doorway tonight," Jack said firmly. "You start at the workshop tomorrow, remember? Which means tonight you're staying somewhere decent. I'll handle it." "Jack, I can't ask you to." "You didn't ask, I'm telling you." Jack's tone left no room for argument. "There's a motel 2 miles up the highway. Clean cheap, the owner owes me a favor from a few years back. You're getting a hot shower in a real bed tonight, and tomorrow you're going to look your daughter in the eye like the man you actually are, not the man 3 years of bad luck turned you into." Michael opened his mouth to protest again, then closed it because the truth was he didn't have the strength left to refuse. Not tonight, not after everything. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay, thank you." But before Jack could stand, his own phone buzzed against the counter. He glanced at it, and something in his expression shifted sharp, immediate, the look of a man receiving news he didn't want. "Everything all right?" Michael asked. Jack didn't answer right away. He read the message twice, his jaw tightening with each pass. "Jack, it's Diego," Jack said, finally naming someone Michael had no context for yet. "He runs the shop with me. Says there's a problem. A big one." He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "Says somebody's trying to shut us down. Tonight of all nights." "Shut down the workshop?" Donna asked, alarm creeping into her voice. "Why, what happened?" Jack's eyes scanned the message again, his expression darkening. "Says the city's sending an inspector first thing tomorrow morning. Talking about code violations, zoning issues, stuff that's never been a problem before in 8 years of operating that shop." He looked up, something cold settling behind his eyes. "This isn't a coincidence. Somebody filed a complaint. Somebody wants us gone. The timing hit Michael like a fist to the chest. Tomorrow morning, the same morning I'm supposed to start. Yeah, Jack said grimly. Same morning. You think somebody's targeting the shop because of what happened here tonight? Frank asked, setting his coffee down slowly. I think, Jack said, that this town's got plenty of people who've never been comfortable with a Hells Angels clubhouse parked on Main Street no matter how many years we've kept our noses clean. And I think tonight just handed somebody an excuse to finally make some noise about it. Michael felt a fresh wave of guilt rising in his chest. Jack, if this is because of me, because of tonight, this isn't your fault, Jack said immediately firmly. Don't you dare carry that. Whatever's happening with the shop has nothing to do with you standing up for your own dignity tonight. If anything, it's got everything to do with people in this town who've been looking for an excuse for years and finally found one convenient enough to use. Donna frowned, scrolling through something on her own phone now. Jack, you should see this. There's already talk online. Somebody calling themselves a concerned citizen posted something about an hour ago, right around when all this happened at the diner, saying the Hells Angels shop has been a public safety concern for years and demanding the city finally do something about it. Jack took the phone, reading the post with visible tension building in his shoulders. An hour ago, he repeated, before any of this even happened in here. This was already moving before Tyler ever walked through that door. The implications settled over the table slowly, heavily. Somebody planned this, Frank said quietly. Whatever's happening with the shop, it was already in motion. Tonight's just bad timing colliding with bad timing. Or Jack thought, his mind working through possibilities he didn't yet want to say aloud. It was something far more deliberate than coincidence. Who'd want to shut you down bad enough to fabricate violations? Michael asked. Jack was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working. There's a developer been sniffing around that stretch of Main Street for the better part of a year. Wants to put up some kind of mixed-use retail complex. Made an offer on our building twice. Both times we said no. He set the phone down slowly. Man doesn't take no for an answer easily from what I hear. You think a developer's behind a fake city inspection? Donna asked, eyebrows raised. I think, Jack said carefully, that I'm not going to assume anything until I see exactly what kind of violations they're claiming tomorrow morning. But I'd be a fool not to consider it. The diner had shifted entirely now, the warmth of the earlier reconciliation giving way to a new, sharper tension. Michael watched Jack's face, carefully recognizing something there, not fear, but the particular focus of a man calculating a fight he hadn't expected to have tonight on top of everything else. What happens if they actually shut you down? Michael asked quietly. What happens to the job tomorrow? Jack looked at him, and for the first time all evening, something like genuine worry crossed his expression. Not for himself, Michael realized, but for the offer he'd just made, the promise he'd just extended to a man who had nothing left to lose except the one fragile thread of hope he'd been handed an hour earlier. The job's still happening, Jack said firmly. Inspection or no inspection, developer or no developer. I built that shop from nothing, brick by brick, 8 years ago. I'm not about to let some paper pusher with a clipboard tear it down over manufactured violations the same week I finally found somebody worth hiring. But even as he said it, Michael could see the calculation running behind his eyes, the very real possibility that tomorrow morning might bring a different kind of crisis, entirely one that could undo everything that had just begun to take shape in this diner. Diego's there now, Jack continued, reading further down the message. Says there's already a notice posted on the door. Cease all motorcycle repair operations pending inspection. His hand tightened around the phone. Pending inspection, like we're some kind of public hazard. That's not standard procedure. Frank asked, his cop instincts clearly kicking in despite his retirement. Standard procedure, Jack said, is you get a warning, a chance to address any issues, a reasonable timeline. You don't shut a business down overnight without due process unless somebody with serious pull wants it shut down fast before anybody has time to fight back properly. Frank's expression turned thoughtful, professional. You want me to make some calls? I still know people down at City Hall. Might be able to find out who actually filed the initial complaint. Jack looked at him, surprise flickering across his face. You do that for us? After what I just watched you do for Michael tonight, Frank said. Yeah, I do that. It was a small moment, almost overshadowed by the larger crisis unfolding, but it carried weight nonetheless. A retired police officer, a man who likely held his own complicated assumptions about motorcycle clubs, and the men who rode in them, choosing in this moment to extend trust where suspicion might have been the easier, more familiar response. I appreciate that, Jack said quietly, more than you know. Michael, watching the exchange, felt something tighten in his chest. Guilt, mostly the persistent worry that his own crisis tonight had somehow set off a chain reaction, now threatening to undo the very lifeline Jack had extended to him. Jack, Michael said again, if this is connected to tonight, somehow, if my situation made things worse for you. Michael. Jack's voice cut through, firm but not unkind. Look at me. Michael did. This is not your burden to carry. You hear me? Whatever happens with that shop tomorrow, it happens because of decisions made by people with money and bad intentions, not because an old soldier needed a bowl of soup tonight. Don't you dare let guilt convince you otherwise. Michael nodded slowly, though the worry didn't fully leave his eyes. Jack's phone buzzed again. He read the new message, and his expression shifted once more. Confusion, this time mixed with something that might have been the first flicker of cautious relief. What now? Donna asked. Diego says somebody from the local news just showed up at the shop, Jack said slowly. Wants to do a story. Says it's connected to a video going around about something that happened tonight at a diner. He looked up, meeting Michael's eyes with sudden understanding. They're connecting it. The shop, the inspection, tonight's video. Somebody at that station's putting the pieces together fast. Is that good or bad? Michael asked. Depends entirely on which way the story gets told, Jack said grimly. Local news shows up sniffing around Hell's Angels shop facing sudden shutdown, right after member intervenes to help homeless veteran. That story could go one of two directions. Either it makes us look exactly like the menace this developer's trying to paint us as, using tonight as an excuse to dig deeper into everything we do. Or, Frank prompted. Or, Jack said, something almost like hope entering his voice despite himself. It makes it real obvious to this whole town that something rotten's happening to a business that's done nothing but help people for 8 straight years, conveniently timed the same night one of our own stood up for somebody who needed it. The diner had gone quiet again, everyone processing the sudden, dizzying shift in stakes. What had begun as a single act of cruelty against one forgotten veteran, now expanding outward into something far larger, threatening to swallow an entire business, an entire community of men whose reputation hung on a knife's edge, depending on which direction public perception decided to fall. Michael's phone buzzed in Donna's hand again. She glanced at it, then looked up, her expression carrying fresh urgency. Michael, she said, it's Sarah again. Michael's heart lurched, two crises colliding at once, his own emotional reckoning and Jack's business catastrophe, tangled together in the same impossible night. What does it say? Donna read it slowly. She says, I just saw the local news is already talking about doing a story on this. Dad, are you safe? Is something else happening there? Please, call me the second you can. I'm still 40 minutes out. The pieces clicked together in Michael's mind with sudden dawning clarity. Sarah was already tracking the story online, watching it unfold in real time from 3 hours away, terrified that whatever was happening at this diner had somehow escalated into something more dangerous before she could even arrive. She thinks something's wrong, Michael said, panic rising in his voice. She thinks I'm in danger. Call her, Jack said immediately. Right now. Don't let her drive 40 more minutes thinking the worst. Michael's hands shook as he took the phone from Donna, dialing the number with fingers that felt clumsy and uncertain after years of disuse. It rang once, twice. On the third ring, a voice broke through, breathless, frightened. Dad, is that you? Michael's voice caught in his throat entirely, 3 years of silence, collapsing in an instant under the weight of 2 simple words. Sarah, sweetheart, it's me. I'm okay. I promise you I'm okay. The sound that came through the phone wasn't quite words, something between a boop and a laugh, raw and overwhelmed, exactly the same sound Michael himself had made minutes earlier when he'd read her first message. I thought I lost you, Sarah said, her words breaking apart. I thought, Dad, I called every shelter in 3 counties. I filed a missing persons report 2 years ago, and they told me adults have the right to disappear if they want to. Like that was supposed to make me feel better. Every word landed like a fresh wound, and Michael closed his eyes against the weight of it, against 3 years of assuming his absence had been some kind of mercy rather than the abandonment his daughter had clearly experienced it as. "I'm so sorry," Michael said, his voice cracking completely now. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought you didn't need to see me like this." "I needed my father," Sarah said, fierce and broken all at once. "Broken or not, struggling or not, I needed you and you decided for me that I didn't." The diner around Michael had gone utterly silent, every patron present, witnessing a reconciliation raw enough that it felt almost sacred, almost too intimate to observe, and yet impossible to look away from. "I know," Michael whispered. "I know, and I can't take that back. But I'm here now. I'm right here, and I'm not disappearing again. I promise you that." "I'm still coming," Sarah said. "I'm still 40 minutes out, and nothing's going to stop me from getting there." "I'll be here," Michael said. "I'll be right here waiting." He hung up slowly, the phone trembling in his grip, tears finally falling freely down his weathered face without any attempt to hide them. Jack's hand returned to his shoulder, steady grounding exactly as it had been an hour earlier, when Michael had nearly knelt for a stranger's cruelty. "Brother," Jack said quietly, "tonight's turning into something none of us expected." Michael wiped his face with the back of his hand, drawing a shaky breath. "Good or bad?" Before Jack could answer, the diner's door swung open with a sharp jingle, and a woman stepped through, carrying a microphone, a cameraman trailing close behind her, both clearly searching the room for someone specific. "Excuse me," the reporter said, scanning the booths quickly before her eyes landed on Jack's unmistakable frame, then shifted to Michael beside him. "I'm looking for a Michael Carter and a Jack Sullivan. We're getting reports that something significant happened here tonight, and given everything else unfolding with the Hells Angels workshop downtown, my station wants to understand exactly what's connecting these two stories together." Jack and Michael exchanged a single glance. The weight of the entire evening compressed into that wordless moment, a job offer, a daughter's tears, a workshop under sudden threat, and now a camera crew standing in the doorway, waiting for someone to decide how the rest of this story would be told. Jack stepped forward before Michael could say a word, his frame squarely blocking the camera's clearest angle. "Turn that off." The reporter, a sharp-eyed woman who introduced herself as Lena Ortiz, didn't flinch. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm not here to ambush you. I'm here because something's happening to your business tonight that doesn't add up, and I think you know that better than anyone." "What I know," Jack said, "is that a camera crew showing up the same night a fake inspection notice gets slapped on my door isn't a coincidence either. So before anything gets recorded, you're going to tell me who tipped you off." Lena hesitated just long enough to confirm she was choosing her words carefully. "I got an anonymous tip an hour ago. Said the city was shutting down a Hells Angels shop over safety violations and that I should get footage before the bikers, quote, cleaned anything up." Jack's jaw tightened. "Cleaned anything up. Like we're hiding something." "That's the narrative somebody's trying to hand me," Lena said. "But then I started digging, and I found a second story underneath it, a video from this diner, a veteran, a kid mocking him, and you stepping in. Those two stories landed in my inbox within 20 minutes of each other. Mr. Sullivan, that's not a coincidence, that's a setup." Michael, still gripping his phone with Sarah's voice barely faded from his ear, looked between Jack and the reporter with rising unease. "A setup for what?" "To make you look exactly like the danger the developer's been claiming you are," Lena said. "Bikers terrorizing kids and veterans, shop getting shut down for public safety. Whoever wrote that tip wanted me filming chaos here tonight, not redemption." The diner had gone tense again, the warmth of moments earlier curdling into something sharper, more calculating. Frank Williams, still seated at the counter, leaned forward. "Lena Ortiz," he said slowly, "you used to cover the county beat a few years back. You did that piece on corruption in the permitting office." Lena's eyes flicked to him, recognition dawning. "Officer Williams." "Retired now," Frank said. "But I remember that story. You don't scare easy and you don't print what you can't back up. That's rare these days." "It's why I still have a job," Lena said simply. "Which is why I'm telling you straight, Mr. Sullivan, I can run the story the way somebody wants me to, full of half-truths about a dangerous biker shop getting shut down for everyone's safety. Or I can run what I'm actually seeing in this diner right now. Your call, but I need an answer in the next 10 minutes because my editor's already asking for footage." Jack studied her for a long moment, weighing trust against years of instinct that told him reporters rarely showed up at moments like this without an agenda of their own. Why would you choose the truth over the easy story? Jack asked. Easy story gets you more clicks. Easy story also makes me complicit in shutting down a business that's apparently been quietly helping veterans find jobs for years. Lena said, based on a tip from somebody who clearly wants you gone and doesn't care how it happens. I didn't get into this job to be somebody's weapon. Something in her tone had landed as genuine, and Jack felt the tension in his shoulders ease fractionally. All right, he said, ask your questions, but Michael decides what he wants to share about himself. Tonight wasn't his choice to become public. I'm not letting it become his choice taken away twice in one night. Lena nodded, turning toward Michael with visibly softened posture. Mr. Carter, you don't have to say anything you're not comfortable with. But people are already sharing your story online, and a lot of them are asking how they can help. If you want that help to actually reach you, this might be the way to make sure it does. Michael hesitated, his eyes drifting to the door to the highway beyond it, where his daughter was racing toward him at that very moment. My daughter's on her way here right now, he said quietly. We haven't spoken in 3 years. Tonight's already the most overwhelming night of my life. I don't know if I have anything left in me for cameras. Then we don't film you, Lena said simply. I can report on what happened without putting you on camera if that's what you need. Your privacy matters more than my story. The simple respect in her offer seemed to ease something in Michael's chest. Thank you, he said. That means more than you know. Jack's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it and his expression sharpened immediately. Diego again, he said. Says the inspector showed up early, like right now early. Says the man's already inside the shop without anybody from our side present to walk through it with him. That's not legal, Frank said, immediately sitting up straighter. An inspection like that requires either advance notice or somebody representing the business present during the walkthrough. If they let him in without supervision, anything he claims to find becomes immediately suspect. He's already inside, Jack said, reading further. Diego says he showed his badge, said it was an emergency safety inspection, and just walked past him into the garage. Lena's eyebrows lifted sharply. That detail right there is the story, Mr. Sullivan. An emergency inspection conducted without proper notice the same night an anonymous tip lands in my inbox. If that inspector's report comes back with violations and I can prove the process was improper, that's not bad luck. That's coordinated. Can you prove it? Jack asked. Not yet, Lena admitted. But give me the address. I'm heading there right now, camera rolling, whether they want footage of this part or not. Jack hesitated only a second before nodding. Diego's there. He'll let you in. As Lena hurried out with her cameraman, the diner exhaled into a different kind of tension, the sense of a single evening fracturing into multiple urgent threads, all pulling at once. None of them finished, all of them demanding attention simultaneously. Donna, still hovering near the booth, glanced toward Michael with visible concern. Honey, you've been through an awful lot tonight. Maybe you should sit with this for a minute before your daughter gets here. I can't sit still. Michael admitted, his leg bouncing with restless, overwhelmed energy. 3 years of silence, and now everything's happening at once. I don't know whether to be grateful or terrified. Both, Jack said simply. That's usually how the big moments feel, brother. Doesn't mean anything's wrong, just means it matters. Michael's phone buzzed once more. He looked down, expecting Sarah, but the message came from an unknown number instead. Mr. Carter, this is Maria Delgado from the Veterans Outreach Coalition. We saw your story tonight. We have emergency housing assistance and benefits advocacy available immediately if you need it. Please call whenever you're ready. We've been trying to find men like you for years, and tonight the internet found you for us. Michael read it twice, his hands trembling slightly. Jack, look at this. Jack read the message over his shoulder, something like quiet vindication settling into his expression. Looks like tonight's doing exactly what it should be doing. Words getting to the right people. I don't even know what to do with all this, Michael admitted. An hour ago, I was counting nickels for soup. Now I've got a job offer, a daughter on her way, a veterans organization reaching out, and apparently your entire business is under attack because of tonight. Not because of you, Jack reminded him firmly, because of somebody greedy who saw an opportunity and decided to take it. Don't tangle those two things together in your head. Before Michael could respond, the diner door swung open again, and this time a car had pulled in fast enough outside that its headlights swept briefly across the windows before the engine cut off. A young woman burst through the door moments later, breathless eyes scanning the diner with desperate urgency until they landed on Michael. "Dad?" The word came out broken, barely a whisper, and then Sarah Carter was crossing the diner at a near run, and Michael was rising from the booth, despite his bad leg's protest, and the two of them collided in the middle of the floor in an embrace that seemed to hold 3 years of accumulated grief and longing all at once. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. They simply held on. Sarah's shoulders shaking with sobs, Michael's face buried against her hair, his own tears falling freely now, without any pretense of composure. "I'm sorry," Michael kept repeating, voice muffled, broken. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." "You're here," Sarah said back, equally broken. "You're actually here. I thought I'd lost you for good." The entire diner watched in respectful, overwhelmed silence, several patrons wiping at their own eyes, witnessing something that felt too sacred, too raw to interrupt with words. Finally, Sarah pulled back just far enough to look at her father's face properly, her hands cupping his weathered cheeks, like she was confirming with her own touch that he was truly real and truly present. "I have so many questions," she said. "Where have you been sleeping? Are you eating enough? Why didn't you call me? Why didn't you let me help you?" "Because I was ashamed." Michael admitted the truth finally surfacing after years of careful avoidance. "I didn't want you to see your father broken like this. I thought disappearing was kinder than letting you watch me fall apart." "It wasn't kinder," Sarah said, fresh tears spilling. "It was the cruelest thing you could have done. I needed to know you were alive. I needed to know if you needed help. Instead, I spent 3 years imagining every possible terrible thing that might have happened to you." Jack, watching from a respectful distance, felt something tighten in his own chest. Old memories surfacing, brothers he'd lost touch with over the years, out of similar misguided pride, similar belief that disappearing protected the people who loved them rather than devastating them. "Sarah," Michael said quietly, "I promise you, starting tonight, that's over. No more disappearing, no more pretending I'm protecting you by shutting you out." "You'd better mean that," Sarah said, half laughing through her tears. "Because I am not letting you out of my sight again, Dad. I don't care how inconvenient that is for you." "I wouldn't dream of arguing," Michael said, the first genuine smile crossing his face all evening. Sarah finally seemed to notice the rest of the diner, the lingering tension still humming beneath the emotional reunion, and her eyes found Jack's towering frame near the booth. "You're the one from the video," she said, "the one who stopped that boy." "Jack Sullivan, ma'am," Jack said, extending a hand. "Your father's a good man. Tonight just finally gave this town a chance to remember that." Sarah shook his hand firmly, gratitude evident in her grip. "Thank you. I don't know how to properly thank you for what you did tonight." "Don't thank me," Jack said. "Thank him." He nodded toward Michael. "He's the one who's been surviving out there for 3 years with nothing but pride and discipline holding him together. I just happened to be standing in the right diner at the right moment." Before Sarah could respond, Jack's phone rang directly this time, not a text but an actual call, and his expression shifted instantly into focused alertness as he answered. "Diego, talk to me." The diner watched as Jack listened, his jaw working, his free hand curling slowly into a fist at his side. "He found what?" Jack's voice had dropped, low, dangerous. "Diego, that's not possible. We had that wiring redone 18 months ago, inspected and signed off properly. There's no way." He stopped abruptly, listening, his expression darkening further with each passing second. "Send me photos," Jack said finally. "Send me everything right now." He ended the call staring at his phone with an intensity that made the entire diner go quiet again. "Jack," Michael asked carefully, "what is it?" "Inspectors claiming he found exposed wiring in the back workshop," Jack said slowly, "creating what he's calling an immediate fire hazard. Says it's bad enough to justify shutting the whole building down tonight, not just pending further review." "Is that even possible?" Frank asked. "Wiring that bad showing up out of nowhere?" "No," Jack said flatly, "because we had an electrician out there 18 months ago. Full rewire, inspected, certified, everything documented. There's no version of reality where that wiring suddenly becomes a fire hazard tonight unless somebody made it that way on purpose." The implication hung heavy in the diner's air. "You're saying somebody tampered with your own building," Sarah said slowly, "to manufacture a violation." "I'm saying," Jack said, his voice carrying a barely controlled fury now, That I built that shop with my own hands 8 years ago, gave honest work to men who needed it, including offering Michael a job not 2 hours ago, and somebody's apparently willing to sabotage all of it just to clear a piece of real estate for a shopping complex. Diego's photos arrived a moment later. Jack pulled them up, studying them with growing certainty, then turned the phone toward Frank. "You know wiring," Jack said. "Tell me if this looks natural to you." Frank examined the images carefully, his expression hardening. "This isn't wear and tear, Jack. This looks deliberately cut. Somebody did this on purpose and not very long ago from the look of those exposed edges." The diner absorbed this revelation in heavy silence, the night's events compounding into something far larger and more dangerous than any of them had anticipated when Tyler first walked through the door hours earlier. "What happens now?" Michael asked quietly. "If they shut the shop down tonight over sabotaged wiring made to look real," Jack's expression had hardened into something resolute, something that carried the weight of a man who had absorbed every blow this night, had thrown and found somewhere underneath the exhaustion one more reserve of fight left in him. "Now," Jack said, "we prove it tonight if we have to." He looked at Frank. "You still got those contacts at City Hall?" "I do." "And you," Jack said, turning to Sarah, surprising everyone in the booth, "didn't you mention earlier you work in some kind of legal field?" Sarah blinked, startled. "I'm a paralegal. How did you—" "Michael mentioned it once, months before you two stopped talking," Jack said. "Said his daughter was sharp-headed for something big in law. Looks like tonight might need exactly that kind of sharp." Sarah glanced at her father, something unspoken passing between them. The small, painful confirmation that even during their years of silence, Michael had still carried pride for her quietly somewhere underneath the shame keeping him away. "What do you need?" Sarah asked Jack. "I need somebody who understands exactly what kind of legal trouble lands on a person's head when they deliberately sabotage a building to manufacture false safety violations," Jack said. "Because if we can prove that's what happened tonight, this stops being a story about a biker shop getting shut down. It becomes a story about attempted fraud and possibly arson-adjacent sabotage against a building full of working men." Sarah's exhaustion from the drive seemed to evaporate entirely, replaced by something sharp, focused, the unmistakable energy of someone finally given a problem worth solving. "Get me to that shop," she said, "right now." Jack looked at her for a long moment, something like respect flickering behind his eyes. Then he looked at Michael, who was watching his daughter with a mixture of awe and overwhelming pride. "Brother," Jack said, "looks like your daughter just might save this whole operation tonight." Michael could only nod, too overwhelmed to speak, watching as the night that had begun with a dollar bill thrown contemptuously onto a diner floor now hurtled toward a confrontation none of them could have predicted just hours earlier. The workshop's garage lights were still blazing when Jack's truck pulled in, Sarah and Michael close behind in her car, Frank trailing in his own vehicle with 2 phone calls already in progress. The inspector, a thin man named Holt, clutching a clipboard like a shield, looked up sharply as Jack came through the door. "Mr. Sullivan, this area is currently under a safety hold. I can't have you." "This is my building," Jack said, voice level, but carrying an edge that made Holt take an involuntary step back. "And before you finish shutting it down, I want you to explain something to me. 18 months ago, this wiring passed full inspection. Certified, documented, signed off by the city. Tell me how it suddenly became a fire hazard tonight." Holt's eyes flickered just slightly. "Wiring degrades. Things happen over time, Mr. Sullivan. I don't make the rules. I just report what I find." "Funny," Frank said, stepping forward. Badge wallet flipped open out of old habit, even though he hadn't carried that authority in years. "Because I had an electrician friend. Look at the photos Diego sent me. Says those cuts are clean, recent, not the kind of wear you get from 18 months of normal use." Holt's composure cracked slightly. "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything," Frank said. "I'm telling you straight. Somebody cut this wiring tonight to manufacture a violation, and you walked in here without a single witness from the business present, which already makes your entire inspection procedurally invalid." Sarah stepped forward now, pulling out her phone, voice steady despite the late hour and the chaos of the entire evening behind her. "I'm a paralegal, Mr. Holt, and I want to be very clear about something. Conducting an emergency inspection without notice, without representation present, and using evidence that appears to have been deliberately staged, that's not just a procedural error. That opens the door to a fraud investigation, both against whoever ordered this inspection and potentially against you personally if you knew the evidence was compromised. Holt's face had gone pale under the garage's fluorescent lights. I was just told to come out and document what I found. I didn't cut anything. Then who told you to come out tonight? Jack asked. Because 8 years this shop's never had a single complaint. Tonight suddenly there's an emergency inspection. The same hour a video of me helping a homeless veteran starts trending online. That timeline doesn't happen by accident. Holt's hands trembled slightly around his clipboard. I got a call from the development office. Said there'd been complaints for months. Said tonight was urgent, that I needed to document everything immediately before. He stopped himself, but it was too late. Before what? Sarah pressed. Before what, Mr. Holt? Before anybody had a chance to fix it, Holt admitted quietly, shame creeping into his voice. Those were the exact words. Before anybody had a chance to fix it. The garage fell into heavy charged silence. Jack's jaw was tight enough to ache, but his voice, when it came, stayed remarkably controlled. Who at the development office called you? Richard Voss, Holt said. He's been pushing the city for months to fast-track permits on this block. I didn't think much of it. I just figured there really was a problem. Frank was already dialing a number, stepping toward the corner of the garage. I know, Voss. Let me make a call. While Frank worked his phone, Sarah turned to the inspector, her voice softening just slightly, recognizing a man who'd been used rather than a man acting with malice. Mr. Holt, if you write up an honest report right now, documenting that this wiring shows signs of deliberate tampering rather than natural wear, and that you were pressured into an irregular inspection that protects you, it puts the responsibility where it actually belongs. Holt looked between Sarah, Jack, and Michael, who stood quietly near the workbench watching the unraveling truth with an expression of stunned vindication. All right, Holt said, finally lowering his clipboard. All right, I'll write it exactly as it happened. Jack exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time in over an hour. Thank you. Frank returned from his call, his expression carrying grim satisfaction. Talked to a buddy still working nights downtown. Voss has filed 3 complaints against small businesses in the past 6 months, all of them on properties he's tried to buy out. All 3 complaints came back unsubstantiated once people pushed back hard enough. Looks like Jack's shop just became complaint number 4. And complaint number 4, Sarah said, is about to become the one that finally sticks to him instead. Michael, watching his daughter operate with the same calm precision he recognized from his own years of military discipline, felt something swell in his chest that had nothing to do with the night's chaos. Pride. Pure, simple pride, the kind he hadn't allowed himself to feel in longer than he could remember. You did that, he said quietly to her. You just took apart somebody's entire scheme in 15 minutes. I had a good teacher, Sarah said, glancing at him. You always told me growing up that the truth doesn't need volume, it just needs patience. Michael's eyes glistened. I said that every single time I got nervous before a test, Sarah said, smiling through fresh tears. I never forgot it, not once in 3 years. Jack watched the exchange with quiet satisfaction, something settling in his chest that felt remarkably close to peace despite the long, exhausting night still unwinding around them. His phone buzzed once more. He glanced at it, and a slow, surprised smile spread across his weathered face. Lena's story just went up, he said. Local news website. Headline reads, Developers' alleged sabotage threatens veteran-friendly workshop hours after biker's act of kindness goes viral. She didn't waste any time, Frank said, impressed. She had the whole story before we even finished confirming it, Jack said, scrolling through the article. Photos of the wiring statement from Holt already included. Apparently he called her directly after we left. Even got a quote from Voss's office denying everything, which honestly just makes it look worse. Michael read over Jack's shoulder, watching his own face appear in the article alongside the original diner footage, now reframed entirely not as a story of humiliation, but as a story of dignity, restored of an entire town, discovering what they'd allowed to go unnoticed for 3 long years. Jack, Michael said quietly, your shop's going to be all right. Looks that way. Jack admitted something like genuine relief, finally breaking through his composed exterior. Looks like tonight, for all its chaos, ended up protecting exactly the things worth protecting. The weeks that followed moved faster than any of them could have anticipated. Voss's development company withdrew its offer entirely within 72 hours. The public scrutiny proving far too costly for a deal that had never been worth the reputational damage now attached to it. The city issued a formal apology to Jack's shop, along with a quiet promise to review inspection procedures more carefully going forward. Michael started work at the workshop the following morning, exactly as promised. His hands remembering inventory systems and organizational discipline faster than he'd believed possible. Within a month, he'd reorganized the entire parts department with the same precision he'd once applied to supply logistics overseas, earning quiet respect from every mechanic who worked alongside him. Sarah visited every weekend, the gap of 3 lost years, slowly closing with each conversation, each shared meal, each small rebuilding of trust between father and daughter. She eventually helped Michael navigate the VA paperwork that had defeated him for years, cutting through bureaucratic delays with the same sharp persistence she'd shown the night she dismantled Holt's fraudulent inspection. The Veterans Outreach Coalition that had reached out that first chaotic night followed through, completely connecting Michael not just with housing assistance he ultimately didn't need thanks to Jack, but with a support group of fellow veterans navigating similar struggles with reintegration and forgotten promises. And Tyler. Tyler showed up at the workshop 3 weeks later, alone, no friends, no camera, no audience of any kind. He stood awkwardly near the entrance until Jack noticed him and walked over, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Didn't expect to see you here," Jack said. "I wanted to ask if there was anything I could do," Tyler said, his voice carrying none of the swagger from that first night. "To help, not for views, not for anybody watching, just because I keep thinking about what you said about actually seeing people instead of just using them." Jack studied him for a long moment before glancing toward Michael, who was organizing inventory nearby, listening without turning around. "Michael," Jack called, "you mind some extra hands around here? A couple afternoons a week." Michael turned, studying Tyler carefully, weighing the boy's transformed posture against the memory of that humiliating dollar bill thrown contemptuously to the floor. "Depends," Michael said finally. "You willing to actually work, not perform working? Actually work?" "Yes, sir," Tyler said immediately. "Whatever you need." Michael nodded slowly. "All right then, grab that broom. We'll start with sweeping, see how serious you actually are about this." It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't dramatic. But over the following months, Tyler showed up, reliably learning humility, one small task at a time, eventually volunteering at the Veterans Outreach Center after school exactly as he'd promised that very first chaotic night. Months later, on a clear autumn afternoon, almost exactly 1 year after that first terrible evening at the diner, the workshop gathered for a small ceremony. Nobody had planned, but everybody felt was necessary. Michael, now managing the entire operation with quiet, steady authority, stood before an American flag freshly raised on a pole near the entrance, his daughter beside him, Jack, and dozens of fellow Hells Angels members standing in respectful silence around them. Tyler stood near the back, having earned his place among them through a year of consistent, humble effort rather than empty words. Michael looked out at the gathered crowd, his voice steady, carrying none of the brokenness that had defined him a year earlier. "A year ago," he said, "I was counting nickels for a bowl of soup, invisible to almost everyone around me. Tonight I stand here surrounded by people who saw me, who chose to see me when it would have been so much easier to look away." His eyes found Jack's. "Brother, you didn't just stop a humiliation that night. You reminded an entire town what dignity actually looks like." Jack nodded, once solemn, proud, saying nothing because nothing needed to be said. Michael's eyes moved to Sarah. "And you, sweetheart, you came back into my life exactly when I needed you most, and you never let me disappear again." Sarah squeezed his hand, tears falling freely, unashamed. Finally, Michael's gaze settled on Tyler, standing quietly at the edge of the gathered crowd. "And to the boy who once told me to crawl for $1, you became the young man who chose every single day since to do better. That matters more than any apology ever could." Tyler nodded, eyes glistening, finally understanding completely the weight of what real strength actually meant. As the flag rose fully against the clear autumn sky, dozens of leather-clad bikers stood in solemn, unified silence, not celebrating revenge or victory, but honoring something far more enduring: service. Remember dignity, restored in the simple, unshakable truth that one person's willingness to stand up against cruelty could ripple outward, changing lives nobody could have predicted that very first terrible night. Never judge a person's worth by their appearance or their circumstances. Sometimes the strongest heroes wear torn jackets instead of medals, and sometimes the very people society teaches you to fear are the first ones brave enough to stand up for those everyone else has already abandoned. This story stands complete a testament to the truth that dignity once restored never truly disappears again.